Welcome to the HERHealth Podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
Welcome to the HERHealth Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Yercich, with the Alliance Against Violence in University, or AVA. I am an early career researcher and the lead on the webinar series. In my other lives, I am the co-director of the Freda Centre for Research on Violence Against Women and Children and faculty in the Department of Sociology and Criminology at Capilano University. In today's episode, we're speaking with Kira Snodgrass and Mary Valenzuela of Calgary Communities Against Sexual Abuse, or CCASA. Kira, Mary, thank you for joining us. Would you mind beginning with a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, for sure. Mary, I can go first if that's okay. Yeah, my name's Kira, and I am a sexual violence educator with the public ed team at CCASA. My background is in child and youth care and addictions counseling, and I've been working in the sexual violence sector on and off for about the last 5 years, I would say. So I've been able to do both frontline work, supporting folks who have experienced sexual violence, and then also working on the education side. And Mary, I'll let you go ahead.
Awesome, thanks. So my name's Mary. I am also a sexual violence educator with the public side, but I've been with CASA for over a year. I'm actually celebrating my 2 years this year, and I started off as a child and youth educator. So I did a year of that before transferring to the public side, which is more focused on adult education. And my background is in sociology and in women and gender studies, and I have been an educator for over 6 years, I want to say, because I've worked with other nonprofits. I've worked at an immigrant serving agency before, as well as the Calgary Police Museum as an educator as well.
Great. Thank you both so much. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with both of you today due to your breadth of experience and the important work that you do. And also congrats on your 2 years coming up.
Thank you.
So to start off, during the webinar, you touched on the impact of sexual violence. Can you expand on some of the emotional, psychological, and/or social consequences that survivors may experience, especially when abuse begins in childhood?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we're talking about impacts, it's so important for us to understand that sexual violence really does impact everyone differently. There are some common impacts, I would say, amongst folks who have experienced sexual violence, but we always want to make sure that, especially when we're supporting, we aren't assuming how someone will be impacted based on what we typically can refer to as common impacts. Part of the piece, as it relates to really any form of sexual violence experienced, but especially childhood sexual abuse, it can often come down to other factors being experienced at the same time, like how long was the abuse occurring for? Did it occur in the home? Did they have a strong support system outside of the person causing harm? Was it reoccurring? I think these factors really greatly influence the impacts that someone may experience and how long those impacts last for too. I think all of us are probably pretty familiar with adverse childhood experiences, but we know that that can have lasting impacts, but with the right supports and resources, we also know that children are incredibly resilient. So through the session, you heard us share some of the common impacts, just a little brief overview and how they can overlap as well. And within our role, we often do discuss some of the more common impacts. But the goal of that exercise really isn't to memorize those common impacts, because a lot of the time I think we think of mental health challenges, PTSD, maybe changes in how someone physically presents themselves, changes in someone's social behavior, that sort of thing. And while we explore those, like I said, the goal isn't to really memorize those and be able to hold those in. Instead, it's to really be able to explore the overall nuances of how no two situations or experiences of sexual violence are alike, because it does come down to individual lived experiences, and it can really be influenced by someone's life experience prior to and even after the sexual violence. And what's really important to note is what can also heavily influence the way someone experiences impacts after sexual violence is the way that they're received and supported when they disclose their experience to others. So a lot of that is really kind of the main focus of what we look at when we are looking at impacts, because impacts truly can be so broad, and especially in all the different categories. And the way those impacts come to fruition might even look different, even if it'd be under the same impact category between two different individuals.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. That's really helpful. Mary, do you have anything you want to add before we continue forward?
I actually think Kara covered everything. She did an amazing job on that one.
Then that's perfect. So you mentioned disclosures, which brings up the question for me around how I'm sure you both know, and we all know that disclosures can be a vulnerable and powerful moment. But what are some of the trauma-informed ways to respond when someone shares their experience of sexual violence with you?
Yeah. I think I truly believe that a big piece of creating a supportive and informed basis for receiving disclosures is to really just be aware of the fact that everyone experiences things differently. Life is not a one size fits all, and neither is trauma. There are also often intersecting factors and experiences that we may not know about. And when we are looking at the trauma informed approach, part of that is by assuming that we don't know everything. We don't know potentially other intersecting factors that can compound with the trauma, or can even just create a barrier to people being able to access support. So really being able to hold that understanding that we might just know, or we might only see the tip of the iceberg, right? And there might be things that we don't know. Being able to allow that person to kind of guide us, but not having that one size fits all approach. With that being said, I know we had mentioned during the presentation that what we say at CASA is that there's 5 key messages of support. So I believe you, it's not your fault, your feelings are valid, your needs come first, and I support your decisions. And while we shared, these statements don't need to be said word for word, doesn't need to be like a robotic repetition of these statements, but using those as a foundation to really fuel the way that we support someone in the moment. It really does create a strong foundation for supporting. I think one thing that I've learned for someone shares something tough with you, maybe you don't know how to respond, or you have like fear of saying the wrong thing. Just responding with that true, pure human empathy can be so impactful. I think we often want to be able to just fix someone's problem or take away their hurt. Unfortunately, that's not realistic. It would be wonderful if we could all just do that. But sometimes just sitting in someone's experience with them and telling them, oh my gosh, like I don't even know what to say. I am so sorry that you experienced that. That can really be so beneficial and impactful and validating. So I think really being able to lean on our own intuition of just having that human empathy can be so impactful when we're responding.
Absolutely. That's such important advice, because I know that I'm not necessarily always in a space where I'm ready to receive a disclosure. And I know many people aren't. So it's good to have that advice to hold space and to know that you don't have to get it right, but you should be present for someone and empathetic, or be there the best you can.
Yeah, for sure.
So I know that some of your work is or a lot of your work really is education based. So can you share with me a little bit about the most common misconceptions or myths that you encounter around sexual violence and disclosure? And then through that education based work, how do you address these?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of the ones that really do exist commonly when we're talking about either sexual assault or child sexual abuse is that folks seem to think that false reporting rates for both of these are really high. And I think a lot of that is just from false portrayals, maybe in the media, about that being a common thing. But as we shared in the presentation, like our false reporting rates really are kind of at that 2 to 8% range. And it's the false reporting rate equivalent to other crimes. I think Mary had mentioned as examples like break and enter, theft, that sort of thing. And it really does become interesting, I think, when we look at it with a different example. I mean, are you likely to believe or to not believe someone if they share that their vehicle got broken into, right? And when we apply that logic and rationale to false reporting in terms of sexual violence, it really does kind of shine a different light on this narrative that we have been fed, that for some reason people think false reporting just happens all the time, and it truly doesn't. That's an important one to note. Another one for both sexual assault and child sexual abuse is stranger danger. As for sexual assault, you're supposed to be weary of going down dark alleys alone at night. You're supposed to be paranoid of strangers, maybe spiking your drink, all these things. And for children, you're supposed to be very weary of a stranger in a van offering candy. And while those things can still exist, they do still exist, and there's still something to be aware of. Like we shared, for sexual assault, 87% of the time, the individual knows the person who's harming them, and 88% of the time with children. So we do really know that this is not something that's typically done by strangers. And that's part of that is a distancing practice, right? We don't want to believe someone in our life can harm us in that way, but unfortunately, that is true. People in our lives can harm us that way, and a majority of the time, that is who is causing that harm. Another common one is that people think really extensive physical force is used. And a big piece of this, again, is movie, TV shows, that sort of thing. We see these grand, like, battles of people trying to fight someone off, and that is just not realistic. Specifically for children, grooming is just such a prevalent thing, and they have a loving, trusting relationship with who's harming them, and that is used to manipulate and exploit that relationship and cause harm. And same with sexual assault. There's a level of manipulation and coercion there as well. But what we also know is that tonic immobility is, or what we might refer to as like a freeze response, occurs in almost all instances of sexual assault or child sexual abuse. And that response can last for even just seconds for some people, for the whole assault or instance of abuse for others, right? And while that can be a frustrating thing for people to experience, not knowing why their body just completely froze, it is a protective factor. And as a result, extensive physical force is not needed. So these are just common ones that we explore with both sexual assault and child sexual abuse. And what we always say when we're addressing some of these misconceptions in our sessions, or if someone shares a misconception and just wanting to replace that with a fact, is that our main focus isn't to shame folks. There are some misconceptions I think that we share in our presentation that prior to me being in this line of work, I believed, right? So it's really not about shaming. It's instead about learning and replacing that with a fact and growing together so that we can share the right information, all of us, in different conversations. So we really look at it as a learning opportunity, not even just as like a correction or any level of shame about like, you shouldn't believe that. It's like, no, that information's out there, but we just want to replace that with the true information.
I love the language of replace the misconception with a fact. Like that's very a powerful way to go at it. And I know too, because I teach a lot of like intro to crim courses where we talk about things like violence one might experience and perpetration. Even like the stranger danger piece comes up, and everyone is always shocked when I say the likelihood that a stranger is going to hurt you or someone you know is incredibly rare. And they just are like, but wait, what? Because I was always taught you don't walk alone down a dark alley and, all these sorts of pieces. That's so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you've both worked with youth and diverse communities. With that in mind, how do you adapt your approaches when working with newcomers, young people, or those who may not have had safe spaces to talk about these topics before?
I can take on that question. I think when we work with youth and diverse communities, an approach that really worked well for us is just having an open mind and an understanding that we all come from different backgrounds and experiences. Kira and I would have maybe the opposite experience, and that is something that we see in the education that we do as well in the community. And I think having the most or the utmost respect for the person that we are supporting, to each individual in the community, and just a really big regard for our differences is a really good way to approach these conversations as well. When I was still in the children and youth team, when we educate young people, we enter that space knowing that these young folks might not have the language or the comfort to fully grasp the concepts that we are going to be sharing with them, or even have the same level of understanding that we do about sexual violence. So we try to approach those conversations in a lighter manner by using examples from our personal lives, obviously not very graphic or anything. We use jokes. We try to use youth slang, which is not the easiest thing to do for adults. Or we just simply have fun with the young people that we teach through activities or stuff that we have embedded in the programs. But we do that without necessarily minimizing sexual violence and its impacts. So in that way, it enables us to meet youth at their level and have those difficult conversations with them without overwhelming them in that moment. It allows the youth to understand the seriousness of the topic and sexual violence, but it allows them to do that in a safe and comfortable space. As for diverse communities, I think the same approach really applies. Just acknowledging the fact that we all come from different walks of life and we all have different belief systems that we grew up with. When we are having those conversations with people who have intersecting identities, we acknowledge that their belief system, their culture, their upbringing will influence how they perceive an experience. And we really try to understand where they are coming from and really just coming from a place of learning and understanding. There is no textbook definition for experiences of sexual violence that their experience needs to fit into for it to be valid. And so we are still able to provide the information that we are sharing with them. We are still able to provide that education to them while still validating their experiences that they share with us. All in all, when we approach these interactions with youth, with folks from diverse communities, or for folks who have not had the space to share these experiences, we just come from a place of learning, from a place of respect and understanding. So we are able to hold that space for that individual's story. When we keep an open mind that is free of our biases and judgment when we are interacting with them, we really allow them to express who they are in that moment and share their story however they would like to. And that can make such a huge difference for them in their healing journey as well.
That is so powerful. Thank you. So that you addressed, Mary, a little bit of this while you were talking, but I'm curious for both of your perspectives in terms of like, what role does community education play in preventing sexual violence, and how can listeners get involved or support this work meaningfully?
For sure. I can start, and if Kira has anything to add on this one. First off, I love education. I think it is a very, very powerful tool for not just sexual violence, but any issue in society that we need to talk about. But when it comes to sexual violence, I think community education's biggest role is starting the conversation. When we think about sexual violence, it is a hard topic to talk about, and it's not necessarily something that you would bring up at the dinner table or when you're hanging out with your friends, or maybe when you are at a gathering. It's not necessarily a conversation starter, right? However, community education provides that space for folks to start that conversation and to do so in a safe and comfortable manner. With community education, not only do we educate members of the society to learn about sexual violence or replace those misconceptions with facts about sexual violence, but we also allow them to share how it shows up in their own personal spaces or how it impacts them and the people around them without the fear of being judged for sharing that. Education also builds a community of support where people can learn how they can be there for the people that they care about when those people come to them with an experience of sexual violence. And I think when it comes to listeners being able to contribute to the work in a meaningful way, I think it all still goes down with education. The things that they learn from our presentations, we always encourage them to share that with their personal network. And that can allow for just information and knowledge building for other people in the community that we might not be able to reach. And it spreads more awareness on the topic of sexual violence. I think when people talk about it more, and the more frequent that they talk about it with their friends, their family, sexual violence becomes less uncomfortable to talk about, and it does normalize talking about the topic, which can result to more people sharing it with their other personal circles that we may not be able to reach. And that would lead to more people trying to change the world. It builds a cycle of awareness and change that spreads, builds comfort, and mobilizes change in our communities as well.
For sure. And I feel like part of what we look at with the education thing too is over time, the narrative of sexual violence has been a little bit skewed. Similar to what I shared earlier about the false reporting rate. For some reason, folks really just think that a lot of people are like consistently falsely reporting sexual assault specifically. And that's just not true. It's comparable to that of other crimes. And so when you're sharing that concept through education and you're looking at it like, would you question your friend if they said that their car got broken into? It provides a little bit of a perspective shift because the way that the societal narrative around sexual violence has been in the past really almost removes it from everyday examples of other things. And sometimes with education, we can actually unpack those. And it's like, yeah, why do we actually have a very skewed idea of the realities of sexual violence? And why don't we react the same as we would in other circumstances? Like, why has it become so sectioned off? And yeah, I feel like education really, really helps with that. And I think for people to get involved into that is to just really never stop learning. Mary and I are also constantly learning. We learn stuff every time we do a presentation, and that's really awesome. But also being able to engage in organizations like CASA and being able to provide feedback on surveys and that sort of thing. It always seems like a small piece, but it helps us continue the work that we do. We just have such great conversations in our role, and it's something we truly do value.
That's so important. And the way you talk about some of those things, like really giving people the capacity to make change in their own communities or even just change their perspectives, it brings up this kind of message of hope for me. So in this work, what gives you hope, and where do you see positive change happening when it comes to addressing and preventing sexual violence?
I think what gives us hope in this work is seeing more people be interested in learning about it and learning about how to support people who have experienced it. We see more and more people from whenever we are out in the community through presentations, workshops, booths, and other outreach opportunities show up in our booths or in our presentations because they genuinely want to learn about the topic and they genuinely want to make a change. I think an example would be when I was at a university doing a booth. We had two students come up to us and really spent, I think, 10 minutes just talking to us, spinning our wheel, not even to get prizes, but to just keep on learning about statistics about sexual violence. Because as heartbreaking as the statistics are that we share in those booths, they do provide a lot of education to folks, and they shed some light on the reality of the situation and how serious the topic really is. But yeah, I think that is just one really great example that I can think of. The hope that we see in the community is that a lot of people are now very much interested in it, and it helps in normalizing that conversation about difficult topics like sexual violence. And because I've worked with youth before I switched to the public side, I was able to work with both adults and youth during my time at CASA. And I've had very meaningful interactions with folks from different backgrounds, ages, genders, ethnicities. And it really warms my heart to see people wanting to build a world free of sexual violence and are looking for ways to do that in their own or as a collective. When I was still a child and youth educator, I've seen so many students do our community postcards and mention that they would like to pursue a career in this field and they would like to make a change in the world and really help people who have experienced sexual violence in the past. And I think that is amazing to see how the next generation are already thinking about making that change. And it just reminds us how the work that we are doing is essential and the work that we are doing is actually making an impact with younger folks because they now want to live in a sexual violence-free world, and they're starting to build that with their small steps within their smaller circles as young people.
Yeah, and I think, Mary, I don't want to speak for you, but I know at least in my personal life, I often get like the question of like, oh, how can you talk about that all the time? How can you talk about
Mhm.
sexual violence all the time? And there's something very interesting about sitting in a in-person or virtual room with a bunch of people and talking about something hard, but seeing that people actually want to talk about it and
Mhm.
seeing a room full of people who are like wanting to know how to be the best support possible. There's something really inspiring about that. And there's something very hopeful in that. And I just really find that it really helps ease the tough stuff we talk about because even if it's difficult, even if it's a draining conversation for everyone involved, there's a level of hope that exists in the fact that we're all even sitting in the room together.
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely. And then, kind of a way to wrap up our whole conversation for survivors and allies who are tuning into the podcast, what message would you leave them about healing, hope, or action?
Yeah. I think for people who are tuning in who have maybe experienced sexual violence, I think it's just so important to know that your feelings and your experiences are valid and the sexual violence that you experience is never your fault. Someone else chose to harm you, and that's really, truly never okay. And we know that healing is possible. It's not a linear process, it's a journey. It has highs and lows. And frankly, I think we can all be very real and say it sucks that you have
Mhm.
to heal from something that someone else chose to do to you. But it is possible to heal. And there are resources and places like CASA that can help connect you and find those really good resources for you on your healing journey. And I think for support people, what it always comes down to is to speak from your heart. Let the person you're supporting guide the conversation. Use those key messages of support as like that basis or that foundation for how you're supporting. I think the fact that someone's maybe listening to this and like wanting to know how to best support already shows that they have a really great heart and to just kind of trust those instincts and share in that just like true human empathy with that person. I think that's the best way to go about it. What are your thoughts,
Mhm.
Mary?
I am on the same boat as you. So like for folks who are supporting, yeah, just even taking that step of like what can I do for someone I care about is already a big step that can help someone's healing journey. And for folks who have experienced sexual violence, really just reminding them that they are not alone in this journey and that there are supports available to them like CASA or the people around them that really care about them. And yeah, like Kira said, healing is possible. It's not linear, but it is possible. And yeah, like that experience doesn't necessarily define who they are. They are able to move forward with their life, even with that experience. And yeah, they are the drivers of their own healing journey. They can take the lead, they can heal however they would like to do that. And I think just to add on for allies or people who are learning about sexual violence and wanting to make that change in the community, just a reminder that small steps are steps and they can lead to bigger steps. And even the tiniest of step can create a ripple effect. And so a lot of times we hear a lot from young folks. How can I make a change when I'm just sitting here in a room listening to you? Well, that is already a step. The fact that you are here, you are getting educated, and that you leave this room applying what you have learned. You're challenging your own belief systems, you're challenging other people's belief systems, and you're calling them out for harmful behaviors. That is already a step, and that step can create a big change in our communities. So I think in terms of hope, healing, and action, we can really say that we can all work together as a community to build a world free of sexual violence.
So well said. Thank you both so much. So that wraps up my questions. And I just want to take a second to say truly for the webinar, for this conversation, for the podcast, thank you both. It's been such a delight.
Thank you so much for having us.
My pleasure, truly.
Thanks for joining us on the Her Health Podcast. transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.